Hi everyone, this is going to be Group 5's HR 201 Cultural Immersion presentation. So just to start off with an introduction of everyone in our group, my name is Caitlin. I'm going to be a junior studying biochemistry. Drew is going to be a senior in biological engineering. Sarah's going to be a sophomore in animal science, and Cost is going to be a senior in animal science. So just to start off everything, the primary subject of our cultural immersion presentation are Middle Eastern and Muslim immigrants. So this also includes people who are attempting to immigrate to the United States and people who have already done so and are currently in the United States. So basically the reason that we chose this topic is because they're a very marginalized group of people. And right now with all of the current world events like 9/11 and the war on terror, they're just getting a lot of hate in the world. And this has led to a lot of much harsher realities for people who are trying to immigrate from these Middle Eastern countries to the United States. And so specifically, we're looking at how there's been a lot of demographic changes. Like for example, there's less of a Middle Eastern immigrant population in the United States due to different policies in the political climate, and how that has also been caused by the weakening of public opinion on these people. Okay, so just to go into detail about my service learning project, obviously we had a few in our group just because we're all remote, but my specific one, I visited the Northwest Indiana Islamic Center Association, and they had an event called Hum Night. I'm not completely sure that I remember what that stood for, but basically we have a really high population of Indian and Pakistani Muslims in my hometown, and my actual one of my best friends was performing this night. So all of the seniors who are graduating got to put on this big dance performance. A lot of the community comes out. It's a huge cultural event for our community. And so basically, I spoke to her grandfather, Ilyas, and who's actually the assistant director of the Islamic Center and was also an immigrant from Pakistan himself. So I went to just go speak with him in addition to just the cultural night. I went to go speak with him just to see what his experience was like and what he had heard from other people in the community. And so some of my goals were just to understand the struggle of immigration as a Muslim or Middle Eastern citizen, and understand any like hateful incidents they may have encountered while in America, and then also just understand the culture a little bit more. And I completed my service learning project and I spoke to her grandfather. And then I also stayed all night, experienced the banquet and all of the cultural nuances. So yeah, here's some pictures. My friend actually gave her a bunch of her old traditional clothes and gave a bunch to me and my friends to wear. And then the second picture over here is my friend's introduction dance. And then we also participated in like traditional Indian henna, which is pretty cool. But basically, I learned a lot during this experience. So just to start off with my assumption that American citizens don't hold any animosity towards people of Muslim and Middle Eastern descent because of recent world events, that was definitely wrong. There are a lot of people who do feel very strongly against this group of people. And so, especially just hearing all the stories from her grandfather, and additionally just other people in the community. There was one, for example, where a nurse practitioner was wearing a hijab and someone refused to let her treat them because of that. So there were just a lot of different stories that were shared that kind of showed me that there is a lot of animosity in the United States towards these group of people. And even in addition to that, there's a lot of animosity towards people who aren't even Middle Eastern or of Muslim descent, but just because they fit this stereotype of what someone would look like, they're treated differently. So that was super eye-opening. But yeah, just in addition to this being a super enjoyable experience, it's just definitely important and eye-opening to recognize that there's a lot of different struggles that people face, just genuinely based on their gender and race, ethnicity, and religion. And so it really just helped me notice that it's really important to be an activist and support and advocate for those different communities that are unfairly treated. So my cultural immersion videos, there's just some links. This first one called The Muslim on the Airplane, it's by a woman named Amal. It's a TED Talk, and she basically just recaps her experience of being categorized and put in certain boxes based on her appearance. And she also just touches on the harm in stereotypes and generalizations based on physical appearance. And she specifically gives her story on what it's like with someone who looks like her, who wears a hijab on an airplane, and how she is unfairly subjected to a lot more rigorous security and screening than other types of people who look differently. In this next video called How Refugees and Immigrants Can Lead Political Change, it's a TED Talk by this Iraqi immigrant named Maythem, and he basically just speaks about his experience as a combat interpreter. And so the United States government hired him to help translate with the local people. And he just talked about how grueling of an experience it was. And when the local government was coming after him, he applied for a US visa to immigrate to the United States in search of refuge. But he talked about how difficult it really was to even get that visa, even though he had already served in our military. But it basically just concludes, and he talks about how it's really important for immigrants and refugees to fight for themselves and their opinions because in a democracy, you obviously have to advocate for yourself, and it's really important to do that, especially when immigrants and refugees are really being pushed aside in our political climate right now. And then this last one called Muslims in America, Telling Your Own Stories. It's just a blog post that talks about their differences between people who follow the Islam religion.
Hi, my name is Kostin Karamakowski, and today we're going to be talking about immigration. The primary research our group has done is the indication how Middle Eastern conflicts affect immigration, not only in the United States, but in Europe. Many of these immigrants are refugees seeking safety from bordering countries in Europe. The recent rise in conflict, for example, in like the Palestinian fighting Israel for freedom, has turned into bloodshed, and this is often overlooked, and we don't really think about the stories of these people, coming from these countries during times of war. This in turn obviously affects immigration in the sense that more people are trying to leave these areas, and it seems just like the United States holds a very less majority of these individuals that are trying to leave their country. My research primarily stated of how tough it is to enter the country and like the barriers that restrict these immigrants from coming into the country and how families can get torn apart and separated due to these policies. Like, for example, President Trump's travel ban, where it essentially banned Muslim people from leaving their home country and coming to the United States. And this, of course, in turn decreased greatly the number of refugees we take in each year. I think he lowered it from 110,000 from the Obama administration to 50,000. And a very small percentage of Syrian refugees live in the United States. I think about like 1% of those that are have left their home country. And another barrier of entry obviously was COVID-19. You couldn't really travel to other countries. And it's just, another reason why families separated during the pandemic, and it made it difficult in families reuniting again. My immersion activities primarily involve YouTube videos from members of the community, depicting, the conflict within Middle Eastern countries and why refugees need to flee, and also how it's becoming even harder for people to enter the country. One of those videos was titled European Migration and Refugee Crisis Explained. So pretty much it's just a quick rundown of the conflicts occurring in the Middle East, and it depicts the routes refugees are taking to leave the country. And of course, the United States is the hardest to travel to just because, geographically it's across the ocean, but that should not stop doing the right thing and taking these refugees in when in a time they most need it. One assumption that I did have, unfortunately, going into this research paper was that the United States would account for a very small majority of the refugees seeking asylum. And in the case of the Syrian refugees, it proved true. Of the 11 million refugees that fled the country of Syria, we only account for 1% of those individuals compared to other countries that have 20%, 15%, sparingly. And I think that obviously needs to change. I think in the case of refugees, they need help now. And I think it's just we're not doing our job essentially if we don't help take these people in and help them, begin a better life, or, have them a place to stay until conflict decreases. I think the information, how it compares to what we did in research articles from our group, is that in a sense, we went from just focusing on all random, immigration policies, think barriers of entry into the country, to just mainly focus on the Muslim community, whereas they've recently obviously been taken advantage of and haven't been allowed to enter the United States in a much more frequent number than in the past due to these barriers of entry. So I just thought it was interesting, first starting off in one topic and then transitioning into something completely different. And yeah, I learned a lot.
Hey everyone, I'm Dhruv, and I conducted a interview with MSA, or Muslim Student Association. The purpose of the MSA is to simply educate, raise awareness, provide social outreach for Muslim students that actually come to Purdue from all around the world. I conducted an interview with their Vice President, Nasiha Mohammed, who comes from a small town in Ohio, but since she's working at a company over the summer in Chicago, we had to conduct an interview over Zoom. And so the interview started with me asking her what it's like to be in a small town in Ohio versus a a much more urban setting at Purdue. And so she said that in a small town in Ohio, since they're not used to much diversity, it's actually really hard for her and her family to make close friends. Whereas when she comes back to Purdue, she has a really easy time making great friends because there's increased diversity in the crowd in general. And so the interview ended with me asking her how I can help as an off campus student for the summer. And so she said that the MSA is extremely active online, especially on social media platforms such as Instagram. And she said that what I could do is share some statistics because they provide a great way to break some stereotypes. And so the stereotype I was trying to break was the concept that many Muslim immigrants that come to America are not very highly educated. And so if you look at the statistics, according to USCIS, which is a very credible source, this is not true at all. The Muslim immigrants that come to America are dominating the STEM fields and many other fields in their given countries. But when they come to America, they actually have to restart at the bottom of the food chain simply because of the process of racism. And so the majority of the population that comes here are either physicians, engineers, or students. And so, what I learned by spreading awareness was that my initial assumption that the immigrant populace that is barred from the citizenship path or the American dream is barred because of the lack of credibility in education, whereas in reality, a vast majority of the immigrant population previously held very high-paying jobs in the STEM field, or they comprise of students in the family. And so, the only reason they're actually forced to stay at the bottom is because of systemic racism. Now, the cultural immersion videos was watching were what it's like to be a Muslim American, which is a TED Talk, being a Muslim American in the United States, a video posted by the Pew Research Center, and a Muslim ban on American immigration, which was by the American Immigration Council. So these videos do an amazing job of showing how hardworking innocent Muslims actually suffer from a non-level playing field once they arrive in America. Additionally, they provide an amazing perspective on the experiences from a Muslim's point of view rather than an outsider's perspective. They also go to show how changes in legislation have a huge impact just out of politics because it tends to impact the social and the cultural fields as well. Now, the cultural immersion documentary that I watched was The Arab Americans in 2015. It provided a 200-year-old history of Arab Americans and their contribution to the American fabric. A lot of the Arab Americans faced increased racism after 9/11, leading to strained relationships, regardless of the fact that they had nothing to do with the event. Arabs continually face harder lifestyle outside of metropolitan areas, similar to the story of Nasia, because the crowd is simply experienced to or acclimated to less diversity. And actually, the Muslim ban placed by Donald Trump scrutinized many innocent immigrants by raising hostility towards them. And so, this is the concept that we discussed earlier, where politics has an implication outside of just legislation, where it goes to the social and the cultural spectrum as well. So the Crash movie was one we all had to watch, and reflecting on that movie, the movie was about complications caused by race relationships in our society and systemic racism. It's about how racism was embedded within our political and cultural systems, and the movie has a lot of scenes about Arab Americans and how these people have to constantly suffer due to their religion and due to racism being placed on their religion, on their faith in the United States. Um, the movie does actually a great job of showing the relationship of Muslim Americans and white people in great detail. And the moral of the movie was that I believe is the only way to combat racism is by being open and honest about statistics and being introspective about it as much as possible. The movie I watched outside of the course was called My Name is Khan, and the movie is about a Muslim Indian family that travels to a rural town in the United States and how they have an extremely hard time acclimating to the setting, not being able to make friends. And actually, the systemic racism kills the son of the family, and so the family is shattered due to the event. And it's actually a true story, making it even more tragic.
My cultural immersion videos and articles. The three videos that I watched all had very similar take home messages. Those being that to immigrate to the United States, uh, many people are faced with very dangerous conditions. They are leaving their homes in search of freedom and are faced with things like starvation and death. And then once they come to the United States, they struggle because of the policies that are at hand and things like discrimination and racism that cause further challenges for them. In an article entitled Immigrant Population Growth in the US Slows to a Trickle, published on the New York Times, states that because of policy changes made by the Trump administration, it is more difficult for immigrants to migrate to the United States. So, as there were already many issues with the immigration system, and it had taken a very long amount of time for people to become legal citizens, these policy changes make it even harder for people to get things like their green card. Movies and documentaries. Exodus, which is a documentary published on Frontline in 2016, uh, really demonstrates how dangerous it is for refugees to escape their country and the treacherous journey that they face. Um, in in the video, it shows lots of firsthand clips of the journey, some of which include starvation and drowning and death. And this I found to be very astonishing, as I have never had to face these challenges and I could never imagine doing that. And I think it's important that we educate on things like that so that other people understand the difficulties. The movie that I watched was The Citizen. It's where an Arab man got the opportunity to move to America and is faced with lots of discrimination and stereotyping as he arrived in the United States the day before the 9/11 attack. So, um, after he arrived in the United States, he woke up the next day to a video on the television showing all of the 9/11 destruction. And following that, he was threatened, beaten, and arrested. And him and multiple other Arab men whom had moved long before he had all had to prove that they were innocent and had nothing to do with these attacks. What I learned through cultural immersion. I learned that not all immigrants are treated the same and that it is not easy to immigrate to the United States. Um, Through the videos and the movies and the documentary that I had watched, it is very clear of the extreme challenges that people face to get to the United States and the hardships that they face while they're here. Those hardships being discrimination, stereotyping, and issues with becoming legal citizens. And so it's become apparent how important it is to educate others to prevent racism and the hardships against people of Middle Eastern descent. What we can do for the community. It's important that we promote inclusion and that we connect people to groups on campus and off campus. There are many national organizations, and on Purdue's campus, we have the Muslim Student Organization. It's important also that we educate on discrimination and bias. As bias can often be unconscious, it's important that people are aware of the things that could possibly already be preset in their way of thinking. Overall, it's just very important for us to support the Muslim community. To conclude, this immersion project has broken down the assumptions that were made against Muslims and shows how heavily discriminated upon they are, and really demonstrates the difficulties that a lot of people don't know that they had to go through because they've never been in their shoes. So, as this project has unveiled a lot of the truth of the difficulties that they have to face, it's important that we educate others so that we can prevent further heartache. And as we go on to provide a detailed research paper, we will be aided by this information from the immersion project to allow us to be open-minded and knowledgeable. Overall, this project has helped show the culture to the group and has allowed us to see some of what they go through.